Okay. Okay, shall we begin? Today is the tutorial for the fifth week of Animal Physiology. This is a course offered by Professor Mainak Das. I am Geetika Agarwal. I'm a PhD scholar in Center for Ecological Sciences in ISC Bangalore. Okay, so let's keep this an interactive session. I will ask you some questions. You answer them. You can ask me any doubts or anything you have in between. You stop me whenever you have a doubt. Okay. So in this week, the topics that were covered more or less included membrane potential and how the membrane potential gets established, what are the causes for this membrane potential, how ion transport happens across the cell membrane, how what is an action potential and how does it get produced, how does signal propagation happen in neurons and what are neurotransmitters and how are they related to action potentials, right? So first of all, there are so in the first lecture, what was covered was how is the cell formed and how what is excitability in cell. So can you tell me what are some principles of cell theory? Does anybody know? You can either type it out in the chat box or you can unmute yourself and let me know. Anyone? What are some principles of cell theory?
Cell, I mean, it produces through um, by previous uh, cells.
Okay, yeah. So the one cell arises from previous cells. Correct. What are some other principles of cell theory? Anyone? Okay, so some principles of cell theory are very simple that all living things are made up of cells. So basically, cell is the fundamental unit of life. Another one is the same thing said in other words, cell is the basic unit of life. If all living things are made up of cells, then of course, cell would be the basic or the fundamental unit of life. Third one, as Vishwajit said, cells arise from pre existing cells. This is also called omnis cellula e cellula, which basically means cell arise from pre existing cells. And the last but not the least is that these cells they carry some sort of a genetic information in the form of DNA. So these are some basic principles of cell theory. Okay. So moving on. So what is the concentration of ions in and out of cells? And the ions that I'm talking about here are sodium and potassium ions. So which ones of these are more in the extracellular fluid and less inside the cell or vice versa? So, what is the concentration of these sodium and potassium ions in and out of cell? I'm not asking for exact numbers, I'm just asking what is the gradient? Which of the ions are more inside the cell and which of these are less inside the cell and more outside? Anyone? Is sodium ion more inside the cell or is it more in the extracellular fluid?
More in extracellular fluid.
Exactly. So that is only what I was asking. So sodium ion is the one that is more in the extracellular fluid and in the cell its concentration is maintained at a low level. And conversely, what about the potassium ion? Is it more inside the cell or is it in a higher concentration?
Inside the cell.
Yeah. So the potassium ion is at a higher concentration inside the cell. So sodium and chloride ions, these are the two which are in a lower concentration inside the cell and they're more outside the cell, and the potassium concentration is greater inside the cell. So in this image, you can see that big letters it means high concentration. So inside the cell, potassium ion and some organic anions, for example, the ones that form proteins and these big molecules, they are more inside the cell, and sodium and chloride are less inside the cell. Whereas in the extracellular fluid, sodium and chloride are in high concentrations and potassium is less. Okay, I hope this is clear. Moving on. So, if now that we know how these ions are distributed in and out of the cell, so what is the directionality of movement of these ions? Or what would you expect the directionality of movement to be based on the concentration gradient? How, in what direction should sodium and potassium ions be moving?
Negative to positive.
Can you repeat that, please? I could not hear you.
Ma'am, from the negative power to the positive power of ion.
Can you please type it out in the chat box? Your voice is not coming properly. Anyone else would also like to answer? What would be the directionality of movement of sodium and potassium ion? Negative to positive ion charge. No, I'm asking you how do the sodium ions move? Will they move from inside the cell to outside the cell or from outside to the cell to the inside of the cell? In which direction will they move? Outside to inside or inside to outside is my question. So based on their concentration gradients that we just discussed in the previous slide, so sodium ions, you expect them to move outside to inside because sodium ions are high in the extracellular fluid. And consequently, potassium ions should be moving in the opposite direction. They should try and move outside the cell, right? And for these, we have certain channels, for example, sodium channels and potassium channels. So, can anybody tell me why do we require these specific channels and why can't these ions just go through the cell membrane? Why can't they move just through this cell membrane and why do we require them to move through a channel? Why are these channels even needed? Anyone? Why do you think we even need these channels? Why can't they just move through the cell membrane? What is the issue? You would have read about this in your high school. This is like some basic biochemistry. So, if nobody would like to take a guess, basically, why do we expect these to not move through the cell membrane? Is because the cell membrane, as you all know, has hydrophobic and hydrophilic parts, right? It's made up of phospholipids, and the phospholipid heads, the round ones that you see here, are hydrophilic, and these tails are hydrophobic. So, since these ions are all hydrophilic, they cannot move through the hydrophobic tail part that is in between the two hydrophilic heads, so they cannot move through this tail part of the cell membrane, and that is why here we require them to move through the these channels. These channels provide a hydrophilic environment throughout from which the ions can move. Okay. So for the ions to move, they need the channel to be hydrophilic throughout the length of the cell membrane. So that is why we need these protein channels for the movement of ions like sodium and potassium. Okay. Moving on to what are the two different types of channels that were discussed uh, during the lectures. Two ways in which these channels are controlled.
Sodium getted ion channel, potassium getted ion channel.
No, that is true. Sodium and potassium channels would be two different, would be the channels based on what is getting transported through them. But what is controlling whether the channel is open or closed? So there are two types of channels based on what controls whether the channel is getting opened or is closed. Anyone? Nobody? So basically, two ways in which these channels are controlled. One is voltage gated channels and one are ligand gated channels. This was discussed during this week's lecture. So the voltage gated channels are the types of channels in which they either open or close based on what is the voltage across the membrane. Okay. And the ligand gated channels in these are gated channel proteins that open in response to the binding of a ligand molecule. Yeah, you were correct, Anita. Voltage gated, ligand gated. These are the two types of channels that we have. So, like you can see in this image, if this is a resting membrane potential, and we have this resting potassium channel, which always allow potassium to move across its concentration gradient. Here we have a voltage gated channel in which when the resting membrane potential becomes gets opposite, when it's more positive inside and negative outside, these sodium channels they get open and they allow the movement of sodium ions into the cell. So these are the ones that are controlled by voltage. And the other are ligand gated channels in which when this ligand attaches, only then the channel gets opened. Here also you can see this image. These are basically ligand gated or chemically regulated. When this ligand binds, for example, acetylcholine in this case, when it binds, it leads to the opening of the channel and sodium ions can move inside the cell. In the other case, when the cell gets depolarized is when this channel opens and the sodium ions move inside the cell. Okay, I hope this was clear. Moving on to the next slide. So, what is membrane potential? What do we mean by membrane potential? Anybody? Just give me a basic definition of what is the membrane potential. You can either unmute yourself or you can type it out in the chat box. What do we mean when we talk about the membrane potential? So, yes, it is the charge difference between inside and the outside of the membrane. So, basically, the voltage across the cell membrane is called the membrane potential.
Ma'am, the difference in electrical potential between inner side and outer sides.
Yes, that is also correct. So
Yes.
these are some ways in which we can define the membrane potential. What is the voltage across the cell membrane? So basically, you put an electrode, one of which is outside the cell membrane, the reference electrode, and the other one you dip it so that it is in the cytosol to see what is the difference between uh, the potential in and out of the cell. So what is the voltage across the cell membrane? And the resting membrane potential is that membrane potential for which happens when the cell is at rest and there is no active electricity. Actively it's not conducting any electricity, so that is called the resting membrane potential when there is no signal being transmitted through the cell. Okay. And the resting membrane potential is somewhere around minus 70 to minus 80 millivolts for the cells, roughly around this value. They can be at other values like minus 40 or so, but mostly most of the cells are at minus 70 millivolts. Okay. So after knowing what is membrane potential, moving on to excitable cells and non-excitable cells, as we keep discussing this. So can you guys tell me what is the difference between an excitable cell and a non-excitable cell? You can understand from the terms themselves. So what are excitable cells and what are non-excitable cells?
Excitable cells which uh, have uh, more amount of particular, positive or negative ion,
Okay, and non-excitable cells?
which has equal number of ions inside and outside the cell.
Okay. I think you got it a little wrong. And Anita here is saying excited cells are prepared to function. So, in what sense are they prepared to function? And why are non excited cells not prepared to function? What is the function that you're talking about? So basically, for excitable cells, Vishwajit, it's not that they have same concentration of ions in and out of the cell. They non-excitable cells they stay at a resting potential of minus 70 millivolts, and they do not change that resting. They do not change from that resting membrane potential. They're not involved in producing action potentials. That is why they're non-excitable. It does not mean that the concentration of ions is the same in and out of the cells. They just maintain it at whatever concentration it is at. So they still have more sodium outside of the cell and more potassium inside of the cell, but they maintain it like that. And for the excitable cells, the difference is that excitable cells are the ones in which the value of the voltage across the membrane, which means the membrane potential, it can suddenly fluctuate from the resting membrane potential of negative, which is negative 70, towards the positive. So suddenly this membrane potential can fluctuate and then it will return back to the resting potential. So this sudden breakdown of membrane potential is what we refer to as excitability of the cells. And as some of you are saying, the examples are neurons or muscular cells or neuroendocrine cells. Okay. And non-excitable are dendrites. I don't think that is true. Like how, like Shantipriya, what do you mean by when you say this non-excitable is dendrites? And potential difference is not zero for non-excitable cells. So basically, the thing that separates excitable from non-excitable cells is that non-excitable cells they maintain their membrane potential at a constant level, and they do not let it alter or change. But for excitable cells, their membrane potential fluctuates. They produce an action potential, and then they return back to the resting potential. Okay. So this is how the membrane potential fluctuates. So for a non-excitable cell, the membrane potential will stay at 70, and this straight dotted line in blue is what will define a non-excitable cell. But for an excitable cell, it has the potential of of allowing the membrane potential to fluctuate, as we can see here. Okay. So as you can see in this image, there are these 5 steps that have been highlighted um, in the production of an action potential. So can you tell me, can you think about what is one here, or like what does this arrow signify? What is happening in this point? And then what happens as the slope increases? What is this phase called? And what happens as it comes down? And one hint here is that when it dips down, it's called hyperpolarization. So can you tell me what are these other things? What is 2 and what is 3 in this graph? So in a graph like this, which shows action potential, you can see that something happens here and it's the membrane potential starts rising. And as it crosses 55, there is nothing stopping it and it goes to a peak and then it comes down. So correct, Anita. Basically, second step is depolarization. So, consequently, what is the third step called? Repolarization. Exactly. So these are some steps in an action potential. Basically, at the first step, it is the stimulus that a cell receives, which makes it deviate from its resting membrane potential. And as you know, action potential is something that happens only after a threshold value of voltage has been achieved. So here are some failed attempts of the cell in attaining action potential. But when it crosses this threshold, it definitely shoots in action potential. And as Anita said, there is depolarization when the curve goes up, which means the membrane potential becomes more and more positive. It even goes towards above zero to a positive end. Then finally, there is an action potential that happens. And then it starts repolarizing and it starts getting negative again. And when it overshoots its normal negative, which is of minus 70, that phase is called hyperpolarization. And at some point, it comes back to its resting state. I hope this is clear. So there are these five steps involved here. First, as I said, the stimulus, it starts the rapid change in voltage or it starts the action potential. Depolarization is caused by a rapid rise in membrane potential, which happens by because there is a certain influx of sodium ions because a lot of sodium channels in the cell membrane get opened together, and there is a rapid influx of sodium ions into the cell, which causes depolarization because now the cell that was negative because it had less amount of sodium in the cell and more outside of the cell, now it becomes its voltage becomes more positive because of rapid influx of sodium ions. Next is repolarization, which happens because there is an efflux of potassium ions in this matter. Because the sodium channels are now inactivated and the potassium channels they get activated and they start uh, throwing out the potassium ions. Now the cell again goes back to its resting potential or even further below the resting potential to a state of hyperpolarization. But to maintain the ionic balance, this is where the sodium potassium pumps come into play and they start throwing potassium out and actually they start throwing sodium out and they start bringing potassium in so as to maintain the ionic homeostasis. Hi, is my screen not visible?
No, ma'am, it is visible.
It is visible. Okay. Shraddhanjali, I think should check your internet if the problem still continues. Okay. So these are the different steps that are involved in the action potential. I hope this is clear. If anybody has any doubts, you can ask me. If this is clear, we should move on. So we're going to discuss this in further detail. So the first step that I said is the stimulus. In most cases, what happens is a ligand, it comes and binds to the ligand gated channels. That is why previously we discussed what are ligand gated and what are voltage gated channels. So in this case, a ligand comes and it binds to the ligand gated channels and it opens the inward opening cation channels. Sorry for the typo. But the inward opening cation channels get opened and sodium ions start moving into the cell, which leads to the membrane depolarization. So here you see outside there's a lot of sodium and inside there is a little bit of this negative charge and less sodium ions. But when this ligand attaches to these channels, they help in the movement of sodium inside the cell. And as they start moving inside, the second step that happens is that it starts depolarizing the nearby membrane because more and more sodium is getting inside. And as it depolarizes the adjacent parts of the membrane, the voltage gated channels now start opening. First, we discussed the ligand gated channels, but after the ligand gated channels have opened and sodium has moved inside, and the membrane potential has moved a little bit towards the positive or has become less negative than before, now adjacent channels also open, which are actually voltage gated. And this leads to the sudden influx of sodium ions into the cell. Okay. So once the depolarization threshold is crossed, which we saw in that image, it was shown at minus 55 millivolts. When that threshold is crossed, it could be different for different cells. But when that threshold is crossed is when all the voltage gated channels they start opening, and this leads to a huge influx of sodium ions into the cell. So here you can see step one, once the depolarization threshold has reached, then there is activation of all the sodium channels and there is rapid depolarization, which is when the curve starts going up rapidly. Then there is repolarization, which happens when the curve goes up and then it starts coming down. Here, what happens is the voltage gated potassium channels they open and they allow the movement of potassium outside of the cell, because potassium, as we know, was in a higher gradient inside the cell. So now, when these potassium channels open, there is a certain movement or efflux of potassium ions outside of the cell. Because there were too many positive ions inside the cell, there is a repulsion between these potassium and sodium ions, or between these positive ions. So these potassium ions they start moving outside, and the efflux of potassium ions leads to the repolarization of the cell. Okay, I hope we are clear till step 3. So step 1 was receiving the stimulus, step 2 was depolarization threshold, step 3 is now repolarization, and step 4 is coming back to the resting membrane potential. For this, what happens is the sodium and potassium ATPase pumps they open and they start throwing out sodium and they start bringing in potassium to restore the ionic homeostasis of the cell. So this is the last step that happens in bringing the cell back to its resting state. As we know, there is more potassium inside, less sodium inside. So there is this channel that uses energy. It converts ATP into ADP and it moves out 3 sodium ions and moves in 2 potassium ions in exchange. Okay. At what threshold value action potential is produced? So mostly it's said to be minus 55 millivolt, but for different cells, the value can actually vary. But what I've read in most of the literature is that it's minus 55 millivolts. Okay. Moving on to the all or none phenomena. So we've already discussed this. So can you guys now tell me what is the all or none phenomena? Or why is action potential an all or none phenomena? So yes, Aruna, you're correct. Basically, only when the threshold value of the membrane potential is crossed is when the action potential can be produced. So action potential is an all or none phenomena in the sense that it occurs only if the threshold membrane potential is crossed. Otherwise, there is no action potential and the cell just comes back to its resting potential. And action potential is also a local phenomena, which means that it is a local event. It does not happen throughout the cell all at once, but it happens in a localized manner and it travels through the cell like a wave. So I hope this is clear. That action potential, if a cell is this long, if it happens at this point, it does not happen in the entire cell. It happens at this point and then it travels like a wave to the consequent points. Okay, so it's a local phenomena. It is not. It does not happen throughout the cell at once. Okay, so moving on to the direction of signal propagation. So, can you guys tell me if you know if there's something that actually governs what is the direction in which the signal gets propagated? Okay, it is unidirectional, but there is still one small factor that governs what is the higher probability of the signal going this way or that way. From axon hillock to which side? So you're saying it's unidirectional from the axon hillock, is it? From the axon hillock to the axon terminal. Yeah, that is mostly the case. In some cases, it might go to the opposite side. But what is the factor that governs that the signal will propagate from the axon hillock towards the axon terminal? Like why is it more probable that the signal will move in that direction and not in the opposite direction? So basically, one thing that governs the direction of signal propagation is the density of sodium channels. So the wave travels in the direction in which the sodium channels are higher in density. So if you're saying that it travels from the axon hillock that towards the axon terminal, that is because the density of sodium channels is higher in the axonal branch of the neuron. So that is why they travel in that direction and not very frequently in the reverse direction, even though that is still something that can happen. Okay. And as you said, mostly in a neuron, the action potential travels from is it is received in the dendrites and it travels in the axonal direction. So let's discuss about the types of cells in the nervous system. So can you tell me two broad categorizations of the types of cells in the nervous system? Anyone? So basically, the cells in the nervous system can be categorized uh, into two different categories broadly. Glial cells.
Neuron and glial cell.
Yeah, so neurons and glial cells. You're correct. So, Kamlesh, I'm not asking how the nervous system itself is categorized into central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system. I was asking the types of cells that are present in the nervous system, and that is broadly neurons and glial cells. And what are the different kinds of glial cells that are present in the nervous system? So, we have 4 to 5 different kinds of glial cells in the nervous system. So, can anybody guess a few?
Astrocyte, oligodendrocyte, microglial.
Correct. So basically, we have astrocytes, we have oligodendrocytes, and we have microglial cells, as you said, which basically form the immune system of the nervous system. There are something called the Schwann cells, which form these myelin sheaths over the axon of a neuron, and these spaces in between, in which the signal can still transmit, is called the um nodes of Ranvier. Correct? So this is the neuron, this is the axon, and we have these myelin sheath forming Schwann cells, and the gaps in between are basically called the nodes of Ranvier. So these are some different types of glial cells. Moving on to the synapse. So as we have discussed even before, can you tell me what is the synapse?
Uh, um, the end, I mean, ac- end part of axon and starting point of uh, another cell, like dendrite. The space between is synapse.
So correct, yeah. And Anita and Aruna, you're also correct. So basically, it's the gap between as you said, between the end of one neuron and the starting of the next one. The next one could be either a neuron or could be a muscle cell, anything it could be. So it's basically the gap between these two cells. And as you said, the one that is present before the synapse, or the one for which the axons are involved, is the presynaptic cell, and the cell after the synapse is the postsynaptic cell. So synapse is also called synaptic cleft or the synaptic gap. It's the gap between a neuron and another cell. It may form between two neurons or a neuron and an effector cell, for example, a muscle or something for that matter, which performs a function that is controlled by the neuron. Okay. Moving on to how does an action potential travel through a synapse? So, can you tell me broadly what do you think happens at the synapse and how does the action potential travel through the synapse? Since we know till now the action potential was traveling through one cell, and okay, fine, it was traveling through that cell. But now that we have hit a gap, what happens in this gap and how does the synapse now travel to the next cell? Yes, it requires neurotransmitters. You're correct, Aruna. So basically, what happens at the synapse is that chemistry comes into play. And now there are these certain molecules which you can see here in pink color, which are the neurotransmitters. So the presynaptic cell has these vesicles filled with neurotransmitters which come and attach to the cell membrane, and they release these neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft, which lead to the transmission of the signal to the next cell. So the action potential travels through the gap between two neurons with the help of chemicals called neurotransmitters. Okay. Yes, Jagrati, do you want to say something? Okay. Okay, so moving on, now that we have discussed that this happens by neurotransmitters, can you give me some examples of neurotransmitters?
Acetylcholine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, glutamate, serotonin.
Very nice, Priyanka. So you know a lot of them. So basically, we have some, like you said, acetylcholine. We have GABA, which is gamma aminobutyric acid. We have glutamate. We have glycine, dopamine, serotonin, and as you said, norepinephrine, epinephrine. These are also some neurotransmitters. So now, as we know, neurotransmitters can be classified as either excitatory or inhibitory. Can you guys tell me how are these two different? What are excitatory neurotransmitters and what are inhibitory neurotransmitters? What? How do you differentiate between excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters?
Excitatory neurotransmitter excite the neuron and transmit message one cell to another. Example epinephrine or epinephrine glutamate.
And what about inhibitory neurotransmitters? So you're also correct, Anita. It basically propagates the action potential. So it leads to the signal being transmitted from the presynaptic terminal to the postsynaptic terminal. So excitatory neurotransmitters basically excite the next cell. They increase the likelihood that a neuron will fire an action potential and they pass a message along to the next cell. And as Priyanka told us, some examples include acetylcholine, choline, glutamate, aspartate, dopamine, like these. Inhibitory neurotransmitters, as the term suggests, they basically inhibit the transmission of the signal. So they block or they prevent the chemical message from being passed along to the consecutive cells. And some examples are GABA, glycine, and serotonin. Okay. So as you can see in this image, basically this is an excitatory neurotransmitter. So the glutamate is released here. It binds to these channels, sodium channels. These are ligand gated channels. Glutamate binds here and sodium starts entering the cell. Depolarization happens and the cell will finally fire an action potential. But here, in case of GABA, it binds the chlorine gated channels or the chlorine channels, which are ligand gated, and the GABA binds it, and chlorine starts entering, and the cell becomes more and more hyperpolarized and not really depolarized. Okay, so these are two ways or two different neurotransmitter types that are found in our nervous system. So moving on to the question answer session of today. So the first question is, what is the resting membrane potential of a typical neuron?
minus 70 millivolt.
Correct. So the answer is minus 70 millivolt. Next one, what is the primary determinant of the resting membrane potential?
The concentration gradient of potassium ions.
Okay.
Yes, I take it down.
Can you repeat that? So Kamlesh is saying it's the concentration gradient of sodium ions. Priyanka said that it's the concentration gradient of potassium ions. Is it? Any other guesses? What out of these four is the primary determinant of resting membrane potential? Sodium ions. Okay. So, but the correct answer is that the primary determinant of the resting membrane potential is the concentration gradient of potassium ions. It is not the concentration gradient of sodium ions. So, basically, if you take out sodium ions from the picture and you just keep potassium ions and then you check the concentration gradient, that will give you the same membrane potential. So, basically, potassium ions are the primary determinant of resting membrane potential. During the depolarization phase of an action potential, which ions primarily flow into the neuron?
Sodium ion.
Sodium ions. So, correct. So, basically, as we discussed, during depolarization, what happens is that these ligand gated sodium channels they get opened up and the sodium moves inside the cell. Which event occurs at the threshold potential during an action potential? What starts happening when the threshold potential is reached during an action potential? C. Correct. So basically, the sodium.
मुझे खाना है इस ठंडा मौसम
The voltage gated sodium channels they start opening. Correct. So next question is, what happens to the membrane potential when a neuron becomes depolarized? Does it
It
become
becomes more positive.
more positive, unchanged?
B. B.
B. Correct. So it basically becomes more and more positive. That is why we call it depolarized, because when it is at the resting membrane potential, it is negative. So, which phase of the action potential is characterized by the closing of sodium channels and the opening of potassium channels?
Repolarization.
Correct. So, the answer to this question is repolarization. That is the phase when sodium channels start closing up and potassium channels open and potassium starts flowing outside the cell. During the hyperpolarization phase, the membrane potential becomes dash. Correct. It's basically more negative than the resting potential. So it starts becoming more and more negative than the resting potential. So, okay, what is the refractory period? What is the refractory period of a neuron? So you're correct, Aruna. Basically, the time which a neuron takes before it can generate another action potential. So it's the time when a neuron cannot generate another action potential. Okay, so next question. Which ion is most important for returning the neuron to its resting potential after an action potential has been attained? B. Potassium. Anyone else would like to take a guess to this question?
Potassium.
So you guys are correct. Basically, it's the efflux of potassium ion that returns the cell to its resting potential. Which neurotransmitter is primarily inhibitory in the central nervous system?
B.
B. Correct. It is GABA. GABA is a primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. The all or none principle refers to the fact that so you guys are correct. Basically, it refers to the fact that an action potential will occur only if the stimulus is strong enough to reach the threshold. What is the role of sodium and potassium pump in neurons?
B.
B. So you guys are correct. Basically, what it does is it pumps sodium out and pumps potassium into the cell. So in a cell, concentration of dash is higher outside of the cell and dash is higher inside of the cell. B part, correct. So the concentration of sodium ions is higher outside of the cell and potassium ions is higher inside of the cell. Which neurotransmitter is most commonly associated with the neuromuscular junction?
Acetylcholine.
Correct. So the answer to this question is acetylcholine. It's the neurotransmitter that is most commonly associated with the neuromuscular junction. The negative sign in minus 70 membrane potential indicates that there are more dash outside the cell than those inside the cells.
Negative ions.
Are you sure about that? The negative sign in minus 70 indicates that there are more dash outside the cell than inside the cell. Correct. So the answer is basically A part. There are more positive ions outside of the cell than inside the cell. So when you compare the positive ions, since there are less of them inside the cell, that is why the cell is at a negative potential. A redistribution in the electric charge of a cell occurs. It leads to less negative charge inside the cell than outside. This is called it leads to less negative charge inside the cell than outside. This is called correct. So this is called depolarization. We just discussed this basically when the um, sodium ions start moving inside the cell, there is less negative charge inside the cell than outside, and this is called depolarization. Endorphins are neurotransmitters that primarily do what? So you guys are correct. They basically reduce pain and they produce feelings of euphoria. Sodium potassium pump exchanges dash number of potassium ions in replacement of dash number of sodium ions. D part. So two potassium ions are moved into the cell and three sodium ions are thrown out of the cell. Axon hillock is a dash structure and synapse is a dash structure. So you guys are correct. It's basically C part.
C.
Axon hillock
C.
is an intraneuronal structure. It is present inside the neuron, and synapse is interneuronal. It is between two neurons. Which neurotransmitter is associated with the feeling of pleasure and reward? A, you're correct. So it's basically the dopamine, as we've heard so many times these days. So we're all basically chasing dopamine in our lives. So it's the one that is responsible for feeling of pleasure and reward. Next question: what is the primary role of neurotransmitters at the synapse? What do the neurotransmitters do at the synapse? आजा. So they basically transmit signals between neurons or from neurons to the muscles. Correct. So that is all we had for today. So if you guys have any doubts, you can ask me or you can type them out in the chat box. Otherwise, you can leave the meeting. We're done for the day. Thank you for joining.